In the final days of World War II, Allied forces uncovered a disturbing mystery inside Germany. Scattered across villages, towns, and family homes were thousands of children who appeared German in language, behavior, and identity, yet many were not German at all. These children had been taken from occupied nations, selected for their physical appearance, and subjected to a systematic program designed to erase their origins. They were renamed, re-educated, and placed among German families as part of a vast effort to reshape the future population of the Reich. What began as an ideological theory grew into one of the most extensive child kidnapping operations in modern history.
To understand how such a program could emerge, one must first grasp the ideological framework that dominated Nazi thinking. Adolf Hitler's worldview, outlined in his work Mein Kampf, rested on a foundation of racial pseudoscience that divided humanity into hierarchical categories. At the pinnacle stood what the Nazis termed the Aryan race, particularly those of Nordic or Germanic ancestry. This belief system, rooted in discredited theories of eugenics and social Darwinism, held that racial purity was essential for national greatness and that inferior races threatened to corrupt superior bloodlines. When Hitler and the Nazi Party seized power in 1933, they moved swiftly to implement policies based on these beliefs. The Nuremberg Laws of 1935 codified racial discrimination, forbidding marriages between Jews and Germans and stripping citizenship from those deemed racially unacceptable. But the regime's ambitions went beyond mere segregation. Hitler envisioned a Third Reich that would endure for 1,000 years, populated by an ever-expanding German nation built upon what he considered the finest racial stock. Heinrich Himmler, appointed Reichsführer SS in 1929, emerged as the primary architect of the Nazi racial program. Himmler possessed an obsessive commitment to the concept of racial purity that bordered on the fanatical. He viewed the SS not merely as an elite military and police organization, but as a racial vanguard whose members represented the ideal German type. Under his leadership, the SS established elaborate systems for vetting potential members based on racial criteria, examining genealogies extending back several generations to ensure Germanic ancestry. By the mid-1930s, however, Himmler faced a problem. Despite propaganda encouraging large families, Germany's birth rate remained disappointingly low for the regime's expansionist plans. The answer to this demographic challenge came in December 1935, when Himmler founded an organization called Lebensborn, which translates roughly as Fountain of Life. Initially, this program provided support for unmarried pregnant women who met racial criteria, offering them discreet medical care away from social judgment. The facilities, comfortable and well-appointed, allowed women to give birth in secret with the option of placing their children for adoption with SS families who had sworn loyalty to the Nazi state. The first Lebensborn home opened in 1936 in Steinhöring, a small village near Munich. The organization expanded steadily, establishing additional facilities across Germany. These homes represented a deliberate challenge to traditional morality. By normalizing and even encouraging childbearing outside marriage, provided both parents met racial standards, the Nazis prioritized demographic goals over conventional social values. Approximately 60% of mothers in the Lebensborn program were unmarried, and many chose to relinquish their children for adoption by SS families who had sworn loyalty to the Nazi state.
The outbreak of World War II in September 1939 transformed the scope and nature of the Lebensborn program. As German forces swept across Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and into the Soviet Union, Himmler recognized an opportunity. The occupied territories contained millions of people, and among them, he believed, were children who possessed the physical traits the Nazis associated with Germanic ancestry. The fact that these children were Polish, Czech, Russian, or Ukrainian mattered little to Himmler's twisted logic. In his view, these were descendants of ancient Germanic settlers whose bloodlines had been diluted by inferior populations. It became, in his words, the duty of the Reich to reclaim this valuable blood. In October 1939, just weeks after the invasion of Poland, Himmler delivered a chilling speech to SS officers in which he outlined his vision for the occupied territories. Poland, he declared, would be divided and exploited. The eastern section went to the Soviet Union, Germany's temporary ally. Central Poland became the general government, essentially a reservoir of slave labor. The northwestern regions, rich agricultural lands known as the Warthegau, were directly incorporated into the Reich. This territory would be thoroughly Germanized, its Polish population expelled, enslaved, or eliminated. Within this framework, Himmler introduced a program of racial screening. Polish children would be examined and categorized. Those deemed racially valuable would be taken to Germany for Germanization. Those who failed the racial tests faced grim fates, from assignment to forced labor to eventual removal to concentration camps. The selection process was conducted with bureaucratic efficiency. Special teams traveled through occupied territories, setting up examination centers where children were measured, photographed, and categorized according to 62 specific racial characteristics. The examinations themselves were invasive and dehumanizing. Trained assessors measured nose length and shape, examined eye color and hair texture, studied skull dimensions, and evaluated body proportions. Children were assigned to racial categories numbered 1 through 4. Those in categories 1 and 2, deemed most racially valuable, were selected for immediate Germanization. Those in Category 3 might be Germanized or used for labor, depending on their age and other factors. Children assigned to Category 4, considered racially worthless, faced the darkest outcomes. The scale of this operation grew throughout the war years. In 1942, following the assassination of SS Governor Reinhard Heydrich in Prague by Czech resistance fighters, Nazi forces enacted brutal reprisals. They destroyed the village of Lidice, systematically taking the lives of every adult male resident. The women were sent to concentration camps. But the children received special attention. SS racial examiners evaluated each child. 91 were deemed suitable for Germanization and sent to Germany. The remaining children, those who failed the racial examination, were transported to special facilities and subsequently sent to killing centers.
Determining the full scale of the kidnapping operation remains difficult. In the final weeks of the war, as Allied forces advanced from both east and west, SS personnel systematically destroyed records related to the program. They burned files, eliminated documentation, and dispersed evidence of their crimes. What survived came from scattered sources: testimony at the Nuremberg trials, records that escaped destruction, and accounts from survivors and witnesses. Polish government investigations after the war estimated that at least 10,000 Polish children had been kidnapped for Germanization, though many scholars believe the actual number was far higher. Some estimates place the total number of children taken from all occupied territories as high as 200,000 to 250,000. More conservative scholarly assessments suggest the number was likely between 20,000 and 50,000 deliberately kidnapped for racial reasons, with many additional children caught up in the chaos of forced labor programs, evacuations, and other wartime displacements. The Lebensborn organization itself became the focus of war crimes prosecutions. At Nuremberg, Allied prosecutors charged Lebensborn officials with participation in the kidnapping program. However, the trial produced surprising results. While evidence clearly demonstrated that vast numbers of children had been stolen, the court found that most of the kidnapping was carried out by other Nazi agencies, including the SS Race and Settlement Main Office, known by its German acronym RUSA.
The Lebensborn facilities, the court determined, had received only a small percentage of the total number of kidnapped children. Most victims had been processed through other channels and placed directly with German families without ever entering a Lebensborn home. This finding, while technically accurate, obscured the broader truth. Whether children passed through Lebensborn facilities or other agencies mattered little to the victims and their families. The systematic nature of the program, its basis in racial ideology, and its deliberate attempt to destroy the identities of children remained undeniable. The various SS organizations involved all served Himmler and all worked toward the same goal: expanding the Germanic population through the theft of children. Certain regions suffered more intensely than others. Poland, with its large population and extended period of occupation, provided the greatest number of victims. The Nazi occupation authorities established 8 Lebensborn facilities in Poland alone, reflecting the scale of operations there. Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, and regions of the Soviet Union, including Belarus and Ukraine, also experienced systematic child theft. Even in Norway, which the Nazis viewed favorably due to supposed Viking heritage, authorities encouraged relationships between Norwegian women and SS officers, with resulting children often sent to Germany for adoption. Norwegian records document approximately 250 adoptions through Lebensborn channels, with only 170 children recovered after the war. The discovery of the stolen children began accidentally. In the months following Germany's surrender in May 1945, Allied personnel and aid workers encountered groups of children who appeared German but displayed behaviors that raised questions. Some used foreign words when distressed or asleep. Others had fading memories of different languages and names. Physical examinations revealed tattoos or birthmarks that contradicted official German documentation. As investigators probed deeper, the scope of the program emerged. The United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, known as UNRRA, took responsibility for addressing the crisis. The organization established a central tracing bureau in Arolsen, a small town in the British occupation zone. From family members across Eastern Europe, particularly Poland, the Baltics, and Ukraine, tens of thousands of inquiries flooded in. Parents sent photographs of children who had disappeared from schools or been seized from their homes. They provided physical descriptions, dates of disappearance, and any information that might help identify their lost children. UNRRA relief workers faced an overwhelming task. They traveled from house to house, from orphanage to orphanage, armed with boxes full of photographs and written descriptions. The work proved emotionally exhausting. Many German families refused to surrender children they had come to consider their own. Some insisted the children were legitimate orphans or relatives from Eastern territories. Others simply denied any knowledge of the child's origins, even when confronted with evidence. The children themselves often complicated recovery efforts. Those taken at very young ages had no memory of their original families or identities. They thought in German, dreamed in German, and considered themselves fully German. The prospect of being taken from the only families they remembered and sent to a foreign country terrified many of them. For children who had spent years in re-education centers, being told their Polish, Czech, or Russian parents had abandoned them, the sudden appearance of those same parents created cognitive dissonance they could barely process. Older children who retained memories faced different anguish. Some harbored powerful resentment toward the Nazis and yearned to return home. But they found their native languages had atrophied. Words that once came naturally now felt foreign and difficult. They had German friends, German habits, and had survived by adapting to German identity. The prospect of readjusting to their original culture seemed nearly as traumatic as their original kidnapping. Political factors further complicated repatriation efforts. As the Cold War developed, Western Allied authorities grew increasingly uncomfortable about sending children to countries falling under Soviet control. They worried about the conditions children would face in Eastern Europe and questioned whether Soviet-aligned governments would treat the returned children fairly. Some officials suggested that children who had been successfully Germanized might face better futures remaining in Western-occupied Germany rather than returning to impoverished, war-devastated regions behind the Iron Curtain. In 1947, American authorities decided to wind down the specialized effort to identify and repatriate kidnapped children. When these operations ceased, more than 13,000 inquiries remained open. Families searching for their children received no closure. Children who might have been identified and returned remained in Germany, their true identities unrecovered. The decision reflected Cold War priorities and practical limitations, but for the families involved, it represented an abandonment of their children for a second time. For the children who were identified and returned to their original families, the transition proved extraordinarily difficult. They arrived in countries devastated by war, often to families struggling with poverty, trauma, and grief. The children spoke little or no Polish, Czech, or Russian. They had been raised to despise the very people and cultures they were now expected to embrace. Many experienced profound identity confusion, caught between the German identity imposed upon them and the heritage they were expected to reclaim. Some children faced hostility in their home countries. Communities that had suffered under Nazi occupation viewed these Germanized children with suspicion. Their German clothing, German mannerisms, and German language marked them as collaborators in the eyes of some neighbors. The fact that they had been victims themselves, that they had no choice in what happened to them, mattered little to people whose own families had been destroyed by German forces. The children who remained in Germany faced equally complex challenges. Those who learned their true origins later in life experienced devastating psychological impacts. To discover in adolescence or adulthood that everything about one's identity, name, family, national origin was false, that one's entire childhood was built on theft and lies, produced profound trauma. Many struggled with questions of belonging. Were they German, despite having been born elsewhere? Were they Polish or Czech or Ukrainian, despite having no memory or cultural connection to those identities? Some pursued efforts to find their birth families, traveling to Eastern Europe and searching through records for any trace of their origins. The vast majority of stolen children never learned the truth. They lived and died believing themselves to be German, never knowing they had been taken from other families. Estimates suggest that tens of thousands of these individuals remained in Germany, their true identities lost forever. Their children and grandchildren carry this unknown heritage, unaware that their family histories contain a profound crime. In recent decades, organizations such as Stolen Children, Forgotten Victims, a German association, have worked to document cases and support survivors. Genealogical research, DNA testing, and archival investigations have helped some elderly survivors uncover their origins. But for many, the discovery came too late to find living family members or reclaim any meaningful connection to their heritage. They remain caught between worlds, possessing fragments of memory that never quite fit the official story of their lives, but lacking concrete evidence to prove the truth. The psychological impact of this program extended across generations. Children of the stolen children sometimes grew up sensing something unexplained in their family histories. Survivors who learned the truth often struggled to share it with their own families, fearing rejection or disbelief. The shame and confusion surrounding their origins created barriers to honest communication. Some survivors chose to maintain the fiction of their German identity rather than confront the painful reality of their past. The Nuremberg trials addressed many Nazi crimes but struggled to adequately prosecute the child kidnapping program. The complexity of the program, involving multiple organizations and thousands of individual actors, made it difficult to establish clear chains of command and responsibility. The destruction of records eliminated much potential evidence. Many of those most directly involved in the program died during the war or fled before capture. The trial of Lebensborn officials in 1947 and 1948, known as United States of America versus Ulrich Greifeld, examined charges related to the kidnapping program. The court heard extensive testimony about the systematic nature of the child theft and the racial screening process. Evidence demonstrated that the Russia organization had established detailed procedures for evaluating and processing children from occupied territories. But the court acquitted most defendants of direct involvement in kidnapping, finding that while they administered programs that facilitated the crime, they were not the primary perpetrators. This legal outcome frustrated many observers. It suggested that the crime could not be adequately addressed through traditional war crimes prosecution frameworks. The diffuse nature of responsibility, spread across multiple agencies and countless individuals, meant that most participants faced no legal consequences. German families who kept kidnapped children were not prosecuted. Teachers and staff at re-education centers largely escaped accountability. The bureaucrats who processed paperwork, the doctors who conducted racial examinations, the transport personnel who moved children, all these participants in the program faced little or no punishment. The crime also presented challenges for international law. The Genocide Convention, developed in response to the Holocaust, defined genocide as acts committed with intent to destroy a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. The kidnapping program targeted specific ethnic groups and sought to destroy their cultural continuity by stealing children and erasing their identities. Yet the perpetrators could argue they had not sought to destroy these groups, but rather to assimilate racially acceptable members into German society. This distinction, while morally meaningless to victims, created legal ambiguities. Modern international law has evolved to better address such crimes. The Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court explicitly lists forcible transfer of children as a form of genocide. The statute recognizes that destroying a group can involve more than physical elimination. It can involve the deliberate prevention of births and the forcible transfer of children to another group. This legal framework would have made prosecution of the Nazi child kidnapping program more straightforward, but it came too late to address historical cases.
The Nazi program of child kidnapping and forced Germanization stands as one of the war's most insidious crimes. It targeted the most vulnerable victims and sought to destroy not just individual lives, but the continuity of entire cultures. The program revealed how totalitarian ideologies, when combined with state power and racial pseudoscience, can produce systematic cruelty that ordinary people implement through bureaucratic routine. The long-term consequences of the program extend beyond its direct victims. It demonstrated how identity can be manipulated and how children's malleability makes them particularly vulnerable to ideological indoctrination. The relative success of the Germanization program, the fact that many children did adopt German identity and forgot their origins, proves how fragile cultural and national identity can be in childhood. This lesson has disturbing implications for any conflict involving occupied territories and displaced populations. The program also illuminates the relationship between genocide and assimilation. The Nazis pursued parallel policies of destruction and incorporation.
Groups they deemed completely inferior faced elimination. Groups they considered potentially valuable, like Poles with Germanic physical features, faced forced assimilation through programs like child kidnapping. Both policies served the same ultimate goal, creating a racially homogeneous German empire. The child kidnapping program was not an alternative to genocide, but a complement to it, representing another method of destroying targeted populations. Contemporary conflicts have seen echoes of this dark history. In the 1990s, during the Bosnian War, similar policies of forced displacement and identity erasure occurred. More recently, credible reports have emerged of systematic deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia following the invasion that began in 2022. Organizations, including the Humanitarian Research Lab at Yale University, have documented the apparent forcible transfer of tens of thousands of Ukrainian children to Russia and Russian-controlled territories, where some have been placed with Russian families and subjected to programs designed to replace their Ukrainian identity with Russian citizenship and culture. These modern parallels demonstrate that the lessons of the Nazi program have not been fully absorbed. International mechanisms designed to prevent such crimes remain imperfect. The difficulty of documentation, the challenges of prosecution, and the complexity of repatriation all persist. Children remain among war's most vulnerable victims, and their malleability makes them targets for those who would use the next generation to erase the current one.
The Nazi Germanization program did not simply steal children. It attempted to erase identities, families, and the cultural memory of entire communities. For many victims, the war never truly ended, as the question of who they were remained unresolved for a lifetime. Some learned the truth only in old age, while others never discovered their origins at all. Their story reveals that genocide can take many forms, not only through death, but through the deliberate destruction of identity and belonging. Remembering the stolen children ensures that their loss is not silent, and that such crimes are recognized, understood, and never allowed to happen again. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe to the channel.